right, okay. I want to thank you guys so much for coming over, and also thank PhotoWorld Dubai for inviting me over to give this presentation on the road to inspiration. So basically, before I start, let me just give a brief introduction about myself, and for all those who don't know me, and for those who do, just bear with me for a minute. So basically, I am a professional fine art photographer and filmmaker based in Dubai, and I'm also a New York Film Academy alumni, and currently being represented by one of the top and most respected galleries in the Middle East, the Empty Quarter, if you guys are familiar with it, in DIFC. I have won numerous awards in the past 4 or 5 years, the main one being in the last year, in 2014, when I received second place in IPA, which is one of the most prestigious competitions in the US. I received second place in architecture and almost 12 honorable mentions out of 28,000 images that were submitted. And plus, I received other honorable mentions from the ND Awards and the PX3 in Europe. I have had also several publications done, from College Times to Motivate Publishing's book, The 43 Photographers, and even the +1 collection book 2013 to 2014, which were mainly for raising funds for charity. So before I get started, I just wanted to give you a brief overview of what we're going to go through. So basically, I'll be going through the phases of how I was inspired through my own personal journey in photography, starting from the phase of discovery to the phase of exploration to change to realization, and the phase of evolution in 2012. And in 2012, I'll be sharing a lot of photographers with you who I got inspiration from, so get ready to take pictures, because I'll be going through them, so you can go and search them on Facebook or Google+, whatever, and you can follow them for inspiration. So all right, let's get started. So basically, the first time I really held a camera was in the year 2008, and I happened to be with a few friends of mine, and we were going to Margla Hill in Islamabad, which is one of the most beautiful hills located in Pakistan, in the capital Islamabad. And I happened to have my sister's Sony S780, the 8 megapixel camera, if you guys are familiar with it. So that was my first real camera I was playing around with. And when I went to the Margla Hills with my friends, I was really intrigued and inspired by the surroundings, I don't know whether it was the angle or the timing of the day that really triggered me to start shooting. So I was really fascinated. And what happened was that back then, that was the first time I also purchased my first ever MacBook Pro. So I started processing my images, if you guys are familiar with iPhoto in the Apple Mac store. So that's what I mainly used for processing my images back then. And I used to spend like 20 minutes just bumping up the saturation, the exposure, playing with the brightness and everything. So that's where it all started. And then moving on, in the year 2009 was the phase of exploration for me. And the first time I really purchased my first DSLR, which was the Canon 450D, or which they call the Canon Rebel XSI. And I remember I bought it from Sharaf DG from here in Dubai. And even the sales guy over there was really promoting Canon instead of this Nikon. But if you honestly ask me, it doesn't make a difference. I love and respect both Nikon and Canon, okay? It's all about what you are comfortable with using. If you understand the settings of Canon better, go with Canon. If you love Nikon and you understand Nikon better, go with Nikon. Because at the end of the day, it's not the camera that makes the difference, it's the photographer. You have to keep that in mind. Because camera is just a tool, it has no soul. So all it does is just take pictures for you, but at the end of the day, you're the one who's behind it making the difference. So then from that point onwards, I started taking pictures with the SLR and started shooting RAW at that time. And I was really fascinated with, I came across a lot of HDR images on the web, And I was like, wow, man, there's so many beautiful HDR images. And are you guys familiar with HDR, with high dynamic range? So then I was so fascinated by it. So the first thing I ever did was I bought my first ever book for learning HDR. And that was by David Nightingale, called A Practical Guide to HDR Photography. And I bought this off Amazon at that time, and this was 2009. And in this book, it really explains a lot about how to use PhotoMatics Pro. PhotoMatics Pro is a software for creating HDR images and for creating surrealistic looking images primarily. And that's when I really started playing around, pushing the application to the limits, seeing what can I come up with, because I was just exploring at that point in time. And then just want to show you a few examples of the images taken in that year. So you can see here, gosh, they're pretty dark. So I literally pushed the HDR to the extreme. I think I converted Dubai into Gotham City successfully. So yeah, I was just playing around with the application. And this is Sukul Bahar, if you guys are familiar with it. So this is just a few perspectives. So at that time, I decided to get in touch with the author himself, David Nightingale. So I feel blessed to know him, and I got in touch with him, and I attended my first ever photography workshop with him, and it was in 2010. And it was primarily my landscape and architectural workshop. And it was that workshop which really set the foundations for the years to come. So, because he taught a lot about compositing, about composing images and framing images primarily, and it really helped me. So these are just a few examples. In that workshop, we went to two different places. One is in the desert in Dubai, and the other is the DIFC here in the financial district. So for architectural photography, DIFC is the best place to shoot. If you get the opportunity to shoot there, you need a permit. But for learning architectural photography, it's one of the best places to gain experience from. And the desert obviously is a great challenging place for shooting landscapes. So that's how it all started then. So by the year 2010, I took a leap of faith for me. That was a year I quit my job at Siemens to pursue photography as a full-time profession. And trust me, it wasn't an easy move. There was a lot of struggle, but it was worth it, I would say. And basically I started shooting a lot of real estate photography. So that's how it all started. I went around shooting villas and apartments for clients, and this is just one example of a majlis, which is so called, which I shot in Murdiff, so for one of the local clients out here. And it looks a bit dark here, but on my display it looks a bit better. So from there on, I continued this for at least till the whole year, till the end of 2010, till I got admission into the New York Film Academy in the year 2011. And that was the time when I moved to LA to study. And 2011 was a year which really impacted me a lot, and a lot happened in this year from a personal, from the personal event standpoint, which would shape my photography journey forever. And basically what happened was that in the beginning of the year, I got admission into the New York Film Academy, and that's when I started my program studying filmmaking out there at Universal Studios campus. It was a great experience. And one thing I noticed was that when I was shooting photography there, I realized that my processing became a bit more realistic. I started to go really gentle in PhotoMatics Pro. I approached everything, I believe it was mainly because I was inspired by the city itself that I felt the need to go gentle with everything that I was doing in terms of processing my images. So these two images were taken in Burbank, California, where I was staying. And as you can see, I try to make it as realistic as possible. compared to the Dubai I showed you earlier. So that's how it all began. And then I came across this guy, Brian Mathias. If you're familiar with him, this guy has some of the most amazing HDR images, and I was truly inspired by his work. You should definitely Google him up. He's on Facebook, he's on Google+, and he's got some fantastic images for you to gain inspiration from. And he had a workflow which he shared with us all. It's available if you Google it, to learn how to process images the way exactly he did, so that you can produce these results the way they are right now, to make them look more realistic. And I was so inspired by his work that I started doing exactly the same thing like he did. So this is one of the images I took of the Grand Canyon back in 2011, and I used the same workflow or processing techniques which Brian Mathias did back then. And I continued this for at least 7 to 8 months. I completely lost myself, and I started doing exactly what he was doing. But the real change is what is about to happen next. In 2011 October, I lost a very dear friend of mine. And it was an extremely painful and hard time for me. But there was something that she said to me that would inspire me forever, which changed my view and perspective on photography. Now obviously it was a pretty tense time, and I remember during our last conversations, she said to me that, you know, Babar, I don't like your work anymore. Ever since you started copying other photographers, you stopped being yourself. Please learn to be yourself. So that was the last thing she said. And it really changed my perspective towards photography. I realized that I wasn't being myself because ever since I started copying Brian's workflow, I really lost myself in the process. So that's when I took a step back and, you know, go back in the drawing board so I could work everything out again from scratch. And it gave birth to something really interesting, which I call the void. Now the void is, let me explain in simple terms. I mean, has it ever occurred to you that you miss someone but you can't be with them anymore? Or they're not there for you? That's what I call the void. It formed a vacuum in me. And I felt the need to distract myself so that I could, you know, distract myself to find more inspiration. And that's exactly what happened. So that's when I was going through a lot of dark ages, I would call it. So I experimented around during that time. But let me tell you something, that during that process, during that phase of life, before that point in time, before 2011, I was extremely closed in my social circle. I would only add anyone on Facebook if I knew them personally or I met them in person. That's the only time I would add them. I was really restricted. But ever since this incident happened to me, I became more open. I didn't care anymore. I started adding photographers left, right, center, you know, just so I could gain as much inspiration I could from them. So since I was going through a change and experimentation phase, I started creating a lot of dark, dramatic images. It looks extremely dark here, but yes, they were extremely dark. Because of the depression and the pain I was going through, it was reflected on my work. So you could see, like, that was shot in Alabama Hills, and over here you got Lake Mary on the right. So, and it was during that phase in time when I started exploring photographers that I went through a phase of evolution. I came across this amazing photographer whose work truly inspired me because it really mapped on to the circumstances I was going through at that point in time, and that is Mr. Browner. My God, his work was like almost as similar to Ansel Adams. And I loved it so much, I was so inspired by it, that I was looking on the net, I was Googling out, like, how the hell is he creating these images? You know? I mean, what's the process or technique he's using to create such beautiful images, in black and white especially? So I Googled out for 3 weeks, searching around. I couldn't find anything at all. I couldn't find anything. And that's when I said, you know what, I'll do everything from scratch. I created my own very unique workflow. It took me months in the making, but I finally, after 4 to 3 months, I was able to come up with a workflow to create images somewhat similar to his, so I could have complete control over my images. And this is just one example I created. It looks a bit dark here, but basically it was taken in Rodeo Beach in San Francisco, and this was in the year 2012. It's a long exposure image, and don't be fooled, it's actually it's a composite image. I took the sky from another image and I placed it on here to make it look more dramatic. So that's what it led to me. Moving on, I started expanding my net further. But before I go there, I just wanted to point out, I feel blessed to call him my brother. He's based in LA and he's a director there. And he said something so beautiful to me during that time I was going through a difficult phase, that he said to me that, Babar, just remember that everything on this earth, there's a time and a place for everything we do, okay? There will be a time in life where you will lose a friend, and there will become a time in life when you will win a friend again, if God wills. And the same principle applies in photography as well. I took this image in 2012, April, and this was in Burbank, and it's infrared, so that's why it's a lot of hue, a lot of red hue on it. I did not work on this image for almost close to 2 years, because I was trying to refine my process, my techniques, so I could be able to create the image exactly the way I would see it in my mind. And after like a year and a half later, I came up with this image. It looks a bit dark here, but basically, let me just show you over here on my laptop so you can have a better idea. So you can see over here, it's in black and white. So that's why it looks almost like the way like Mitch DeBrana would do it, almost exactly, right? So this is just one example. I have many examples. And then moving along in the fine art direction, I came across these two geniuses. Now this is worth noting because these guys are inspirations for sure. Joel Gingelar and Julia Anna Gospodaro. These two guys are one of the architectural fine art geniuses who created their own workflow and totally, which I believe revolutionized the architectural fine art industry, photography industry. And if there's one book which I highly recommend for you to read, if you want to learn to create images as stark, as dramatic as these, is to go for the From Basics to Fine Art. So this is a highly recommended book if you want to learn architectural fine art photography. Because most of these guys, I mean, they spend almost 80% of their time processing images, while the 20% of the time is spent in just shooting it. So it could take weeks, or sometimes months, depends, you know, how complex the image is. And I feel blessed to, to be guided by them, to be mentored by them. And that really added another arm to my photography arsenal in terms of processing images. Moving along, later on in the years, I came across, now this is just one example I created using their workflow. This is taken in Abu Dhabi of one of the museums out there, of the rooftop. So I learned their workflow. It took me like almost a month to really get a good hand on it, to get used to it, but it's worth it if you want to learn how to create such artistic images. And then I came across the landscape photographers. Now these guys are legends. I would say that they're some of the best of the best. And not only are they a true source of inspiration, but they also have workshops and online tutorials for you to go and, you know, learn from them. And you got Mark Adamus, Aaron Babnick, Hilary Younger, Alexander Deschamps, Mark Meternick, and Ryan Dyer. These are just a few. I've got like a dozen more photographers, but this is the best I could pick at that time. But Mark Adamus, his images have a wow factor. I mean, he is by far one of the most, he's a pioneer in landscape photography at this point in time. Each one of us is inspired by him. Even the photographers out here are truly inspired by Mark Adamus's work. I should highly recommend you to go have a look at his website. And I think out of 365 days in a year, 300 days he's traveling. So he doesn't have time for, you know, like for his own family even. He's conducting workshops and stuff. And then slowly, gradually, I slipped my way into photo manipulation. And I wanted to learn what compositing, you know, compositing images was all about. And so I started to explore, and I got to know these geniuses. Michael Karts, Ivana Stojakovic, I apologize if I mispronounced your name, and Michael Klimczak. These guys are geniuses in the photo manipulation industry. And they basically take like roughly 5 to 6 different images and they merge them together. It takes them weeks in the making, but they're damn good at what they do. So you can find them definitely on Facebook, you can follow them, even on Google Plus or on Twitter. So later on what happened was, I got to know Michael Klimczak really well. He's like a brother to me now. But I was so inspired by the work they did, I felt the need to get into that as well. So I said to Michael, you know, why don't we collaborate and do a series together? And that what brings me to the chapter of collaboration. You should always be willing to collaborate with other photographers, because the truth is, all of us have a unique set of skills. Michael Klimczak has skills which I don't have, and he has an eye that I don't have. So, as they say, you know, like 2 minds are better than 1. So it's always good to collaborate with other photographers so you can realize your vision. So that's really important. So here is just an example of the series we did, which I call the Sands of Time series, and it also received an honorable mention in the IPA 2014. So basically, the material and everything was provided by me, primarily, and it was in downtown at that time. And he also provided some of his sand dunes and everything, and he helped me execute it. I had the vision, but he helped me execute it. And over here it looks really dark, but let me just show you over here on my laptop real quick. Oops. This is how it looks. Can you see it? Oh, okay. Yeah? So it looks almost realistic. You know, it looks... so basically the objective of the series was to create a contrast, just to show what the beauty exists when you merge nature with man-made objects, you know? And this was just one. We're working on another series right now. It's still in the making. So that's going to take a few months till it's ready, but it'll definitely blow some minds away. And then we created one of the masterpieces, or one of the classic masterpieces we created was because of the collaboration we did together. And if I were to dedicate one image to that friend of mine who changed my life, who inspired me, and to all those who have been through a similar phase in life, is this image right here of the Grand Mosque Hall of Forgiveness. Now, let me just show you real quick how it looks from here, just to give you an idea. You can see over here, it looks much clearer than that, you know. And this took it took us a week and a half to create. So I provided him all the materials from the sand, to the you know. But as far as the conversion process is concerned, the black and white, I was the one who did the black and white. So I want to really thank him for what he's done for me. But this is the image that highlights the reason I had to replace the floor, or why I suggested him that we should replace the floor of the Grand Mosque, was because it was too distracting. There were too many people walking, and plus having sand represents simplicity. It's always to keep it simple, and plus to have a man centered right next to the mosque, inside the mosque, just to show the perspective, so you could see what's the size of the mosque compared to that person standing at the door. So that was the other objective. And the other thing which I wanted to point out, which will be next, is going to be regarding imitation versus inspiration. Now, imitation is what happened with me before. When I was copying Brian Mathias's workflow, I became like him. I started copying exactly the way he did. But inspiration is when you take someone else's workflow and add it into your own workflow. So you give a different flavor to it, a uniqueness to it. Because the last thing you want is for someone to look at your image and say, hey, this image belongs or looks like the other guy's image who started it, you know what I mean? So you don't want to be, you want to separate yourself or become unique. So that's a really important factor which I wanted to point out. And the other thing is, if you want to see how much progress you've made in terms of your style, or how much, how unique you've become in your own workflow, I highly recommend you to please, start reprocessing your old images. Go back in your archives, go back 3-4 years, and see how much difference you've made, how far you've come, in your journey. So this is one example. Gosh, this was taken in 2010, using PhotoMatics Pro. So you could see it is pretty grotesque and very dark and dramatic. And this is which I just processed like 3-4 months ago, just to give you an idea on the difference. So you see it looks a bit more natural. So quite a lot of difference. I just wanted to see how far did I come in my journey, how unique have I become in my style, in terms of processing the images. And this was all done manually in Photoshop, blending and everything, because I've learned the I prefer doing everything in Photoshop than PhotoMatics. PhotoMatics is for me is like old school. So, and one thing I wanted to point out is that all the images that I've created, whether it be a black and white, infrared, or color, all stem out from that void which begins with, So all because of that vacuum I had in me, I felt the need to go out and look out for inspiration. And that is exactly what I, highly recommend you all to have, minus the pain and the suffering, but to go out and feel free to be open and experiment around in your workflow. Don't be afraid to experiment around, because that's when, when you have a proper accident, you never know what you come up with, a happy accident, so to speak. So, and the other thing is you should follow as many photographers you can. Because the truth is, you become a great photographer not by taking many pictures, but by seeing many pictures. And that's the truth. And that's what I've gained from my experience, from my personal journey. So be open in that sense. And I love to quote Ansel Adams. If I wanted to sum up my whole presentation, it would be like, you don't make a photograph just with your camera. You bring to the act of photography all the pictures you have seen, the books you have read, the music you have heard, and the people you have loved. That is what, and the other one would be, which I find to be true, is like every man's work is a portrait of himself. So, my name is Afzal, and this is who I am. Thank you. I'm open to questions now.
How do you make a living from your work? Is it selling fine art work?
that's one way of doing it. The other way is primarily just going out and doing a lot of architectural photography for interior designers, for architects, and for real estate developers primarily. So it's still a growing industry out here, so there's potential. So in that sense, yes, that's how I'm mainly making a living out of it. Yeah, we had a person in the back. Sorry.
What do you use in your post-processing? Is it Photoshop or Lightroom?
Lightroom sucks. No, I'm just joking. I use, there are many applications I use, but I can give you just a brief overview of which ones I use primarily. I use Lightroom, yes, I do use Lightroom. The other one is Capture One Pro. Capture One Pro is an amazing software. It's like Lightroom, but it's a bit heavy, but it has some amazing capabilities in terms of processing the images. And Photoshop is what I use primarily for layers and masking and everything. And I also use Nik software. If you guys are familiar with Nik software, so that's a really powerful application for in terms of adding different filters into your images. And I highly recommend you to have that if you want to add some new textures to your images to make them look more beautiful. Nik software. I primarily use, I have like two different lenses at the moment. One is the 24-105 and the other is the 16-35, the wide angle lens. I hope to go for the new one that Canon came out with, the 11-24, I believe, the 11-22. But at the moment for landscapes, I primarily use the wide angle, depending on how far close the subject is. So if you saw some examples which I uploaded earlier, so I just go by the feel primarily, for example, I shoot a lot of desert and sandscapes, and the reason is because I love the lines, I love the texture, I love the curves, and I love the way how softly the sun's light, shades and the light shades away from the sand dune. That's what grabs my attention, and I feel the need to express it out in my images. Each image that you see out here, it takes me at least 5 to 6 hours. On average, I'm talking about average. Some images can take up to 4 or 5 days. And the other thing I wanted to point out is that before you upload an image, before you think it's done, shut down your laptop, distract yourself, come back after half an hour, and look at your image again. You might go like, oh snap, okay, maybe I should correct this, or what I primarily do is, I go to sleep, wake up in the morning with fresh eyes, and see my image again, just to make sure it's perfect. There's no color casting, the white balance is absolutely right, and it happens sometimes I wake up in the morning, I'll go like, oh snap, oh shoot, I have to do everything again, so I go back, and yeah, that's one important point I wanted to point out.
So you can work on an image and you think it's like white darkness or your shadows and everything, and then you come into it the next morning and the sun's on the opposite side of the house or the villa, the image looks totally different. So what do you think is the ideal environment and lighting of the room when you're working on an image? Because if you're working on an image for 6 hours or 3 days, there's a lot of influences.
Yes, there is. I avoid having direct sunlight into the room as much as I can, so that's why I always have a curtain. My room is always curtained. I have a curtain so that I could avoid any extra sunlight coming into my room. Because during sunset, the light of the sun is hitting directly onto my screen, and I need to just make sure it doesn't happen because there's no glare or there's no reflection as such. So the other thing is, when you're working on your monitor, make sure that the brightness of your display is consistent. If you have a Mac, it has a capability sometimes that, if it goes dark, it becomes bright, and when it's like, you have a lot of light, it goes dim. Just make sure that light is consistent on your monitor, because the last thing you want is when you wake up in the morning, you're like, oh shoot, that looks so bright, So you want to just keep that in mind when you're processing your images, for longer durations, that is.
Do you only work on natural light, or again whatever lights you have?
I use the lights in the room, yes, primarily, like tungsten light, because that's consistent, for processing, and that's a really good point, actually. Thank you for bringing it up. That's really important, especially if you're processing over like 5-6 hours.
Thank you.
Okay, we have one more question. Go ahead.
Every time I see you uploading a photo, I'm like, how the hell does it work? So, do you use digital blending, and do you have any workshops going on?
Workshop-wise, I do intend to, yes. I want to start having workshops hopefully by the end of this year. So if anyone is interested, keep in touch with me. I've left my business cards there for you guys to keep in touch. I do intend to have a workshop, most likely starting with long exposure photography. Teaching people long exposures is one of the basic things I could teach. And then later on, inshallah, let's see. I want to start teaching compositing. Start basically to inspire people to create their own images, to bring the art out of them. So that's really important. Thank you so much, man, for putting it out.
Thank you, thank you.
Any other questions? Oh, one more? In the front. Yes, go ahead.
When you go on social media and post your images, do you watermark them, or how do you protect them? Because there's the problem with the media now.
One thing I want to clarify, yes, I do watermark my images, but to be honest, one thing you have to accept is the minute you put your image online, consider it stolen. It's gone. Okay, you put it online for people to steal it. That's one thing I wanted to clarify and admit. But the reason I put a watermark is not for them. It's for those who find my work on Google when they Google image my work, and they see like, who the hell created this image? Then my watermark would show up. Like, okay, Baba Afzal. Okay, let's go to his website. It's for them. It's not for the one stealing my image. I mean, at the end of the day, that's one fact we have to accept. Unfortunately, in the world we live in nowadays, in the modern world, that your images are stolen no matter what. So that's why I always upload low-res images. I don't upload high-res. I keep it to 900 pixels wide, maximum maybe 1,000. But that's about it. Not more than that. And it's important. It's really important to watermark. For me, I personally think it's important because you need to represent your image. The last thing you want is if you don't have a watermark on your image, right? There's a chance that the photographer who's looking at your image might not relate to you, but relate to someone else who has a similar work like yours. That's what you want to avoid. Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
What websites would you recommend to, as a new photographer, to upload the images, for instance, Google Plus, Flickr, etc.? I mean, if you was to choose three professional or semi-professional sites that, as a new photographer, what would you recommend? I
highly recommend for gaining inspiration. 500px. Are you guys familiar with 500px? One of the best photography websites to gain inspiration from. I have following many photographers out there. So that's one platform I highly recommend you to open an account on. The other is Facebook. Google Plus is kind of, it's still alive, but it isn't as active as it used to be when it came out. But there's still photographers on there who are promoting their work, and I do it as well, because you never know who might like my image or who might, need it. But I primarily use Facebook. I use my Facebook page. I use my personal profile because I find it more real, I gain more reach that way. And plus, I get to add photographers, I get to follow photographers, and a lot of people and photographers I know interact through Facebook primarily. So that's another platform I recommend for Facebook, 500px, and what other platform I can think of? Google Plus. Google Plus is good, but the quality on Google Plus is better than Facebook any day. Facebook compresses the crap out of your image. I mean, literally, when I kind of literally feel like sometimes deleting my image online, like, it looks horrible because of the compression. So yeah, that's the other thing. Any other questions? Yes, I do. Yep, Instagram also. Thank you. Sorry, I missed out on that. Instagram is another platform I highly recommend it to be on, especially for sharing your work, hashtagging especially. Hashtag works a lot. You got a lot of popular groups out there. with lower 70, 80, 90,000 followers. And if your work is really good, they'll promote your work. And even they'll tag you in it. So it's highly recommended to go for Instagram as well. So that's another platform. Thank you. Alright, that's it? Anything else or? Alright. Thank you so much guys. Thank you for coming over.